Part 5. Conan waited until the servant had turned. Then with quick fingers he reached out and removed the singular key from the servant's belt. With a quick cut of his dagger and his other palm below the fallen key, he stole the vault key, and the servant was none the wiser. He silently praised his favorite Aranjunian knife-maker for being obsessive in the pursuit of excellence in his craft. Conan watched the servant walk away from where the Cimmerian was hiding, none the wiser of the theft. He had seen the servant going into and out of the lower levels of the temple. It made sense that the vaults he needed to explore would be underground. Getting into the temple had not been difficult, though there had been a moment when Conan had thought he might need to render a guard unconscious. The grounds around the temple were guarded by the city watch. The guards were not overly concerned with thieves attempting to enter the temple. Since Marcellus's bloody meeting with Dur-le-Moq a fortnight earlier, the temple had made it a point to move most of its wealth to more secure locations. Only the temple's daily offering to Zath was here now, and that was not enough wealth to tempt thieves to risk the capture. Much of the guard's work was also done by the fear that the Zamorin's had of dread Zath, the spider god. But Conan did not fear a god's curse. In his experience, gods did not pay attention to the prayers of their most loyal priests, much less a few missing baubles. Of more concern to the Cimmerian were the silent ones. These priests, wearing gags to help them keep their vows of silence, had proven to be troublesome opponents when he had last crossed swords with them. They were fanatically loyal to Moq, and Conan would rather avoid their attention. With careful timing of step and hugging the shadows, Conan wormed his way further into the underground chambers of the temple. He now had the key he needed to enter the vault, but he still lacked a definite idea of the floor plan of the temple. It would serve everyone little if he were discovered because he accidentally triggered a trap or blundered into a sentry. His attempt to find a tongue willing to wag the temple's secrets had been fruitless. The search would have to be done by foot. Conan ducked sight behind alcoves and in shadows. He discovered a stairwell leading down below the temple and followed this. Servants did not seem to use this stair, as the kitchens and stores seemed to be on the level above. He descended it carefully, and was thankful that the Zamorins had lit the walls and rooms he now stocked with oil lamps. He passed by doors that had bolt slides. Curious as to what lay beyond, Conan slid one of these bolts open and peered inside. He saw nothing, but he heard the whimpering of a captive. He hated to leave the man or woman there, for slavery revolted him, yet he could not afford to be caught in his task. With the grim determination to return later, Conan slid the bolt closed. There were over 100 of these cells in the dungeon, yet no chamber in which a torturer would ply his trade. Conan realized with disgust that the tortures most likely were conducted above him in the Temple of Zath itself. Another stairwell led further down, but this one was not lit. Conan paced himself against the wall and crept down. He had been prowling about the dungeons of the temple for over an hour now, and he had to remind himself the lessons of thievery that his friend had made him recount. He was reminded of Tiny Parkar's voice making him repeat the third lesson. Patience, patience, patience. Conan sensed that the stairwell ended in a wide and empty foyer-like landing. He felt along the wall and found that there were 3 exits from the landing. At each landing, he used all of his senses. He listened to each but could discern no difference in sounds. He sniffed but could detect no difference in odor. Having no indication of which way to go, he decided to take the passage that had originally been on his left and make his way down it. He crept in the dark for almost half an hour more, passing closed doors not unlike the doors of the level above him. Then he spotted a hint of light. Now he was even more cautious, for where there was light, there was likely to be men that needed it to see. He approached the light slowly and discovered it was light that was filtering past the cracks of a door. The door was heavy and wrought of iron. Beside the door stood a guard. Conan observed the man. There were no ways to approach the guard and avoid his sight. Conan was about to curse his luck when he heard the snore. It echoed down the hall to him and revealed that the guard was asleep. Conan smirked. He patted down the hall on his very quiet feet and knelt before the guard. The guard had managed to lean against the wall and use his staff to keep him upright. A small ledge along the wall gave the guard's buttocks something on which to rest his body weight. Conan considered playing some prank upon the man, yet he did not know how long he would be searching, or if he would have time to come back. So instead, Conan contented himself with the lock of the door. He carefully placed the key he had stolen into the lock and turned it. The lock clicked, and Conan slowly opened the door. He stepped inside and then closed the iron door behind him. The door was equipped with some advanced hinge and was well oiled. Moving it was a silent and easy process. Now he was past the door, and the chamber beyond was illuminated by oil lamps. In their flickering light Conan perceived that this chamber was the one in which Derle was working his black arts. Upon the ground a circle was cut into the floor stones. This circle had been filled with molten copper and allowed to cool. Engraved on its surface were many strange signs and glyphs. Inside the circle lay a triangle cut and filled with copper in the same manner. Inside this triangle a pot with burning herbs stood alone, and a foul vapor arose. Blood and viscera lay about the pot, and cowering in the corner of the room, Conan saw a man whimpering. The man was old, but not elderly. He stank of a long tenure in the room with no relief. The man turned his face from the door and placed his hands over his head. "Please, please, Lord Mok, no more," the man pleaded. "Whisper," Conan ordered. "What? You are not Mok, nor the beast he had me call up from the bowels of Tartarus. You are not one of his priests or guards either. Who are you?" the captive asked. "No friend of Derle Mok, that is for certain." "Why have they imprisoned you here?" Conan asked. "Books. They have imprisoned me for my love of books," the wretch lamented. "Scrolls from far away and long ago comprised my collection. Amongst them was an oddity. I knew not of its purposes. I simply found it lovely to look at. But sometime in the recent past, a month or longer, I can't recall, a curious desire to read it came over me. So I hired a scholar to help me translate the scroll. He made copies in plain Zamorin, but I wished to hear its poetry in its mother language. After paying him a hefty amount, he transcribed me a transliteration. Then he left. Later that night when I read the scroll, she came out of the blackness, out of the smoke. She bowed to me and promised me my every desire would be done if I would but command her." Here the wretch fell into shameful sobbing that made Conan revile him. "And I commanded her. It had been so long since I had the company of a beautiful woman, so very long. How was I to know the price for my dalliance would be my imprisonment when the scholar I had hired sold my archives and activities to the silent ones of the temple? Now I reside here, as alone as before. The servant I conjured serves me not, and now serves Mok and his temple. They beat me and torture me until I commanded her to obey all his, and him alone, commands. The burden of the art that conjured her is to be mine, not his. Zath shall devour me. Oh, there is no hope, none to be had." So that was it, Conan thought. Derle Mok can truthfully say he had not brokered a deal with devils. Instead, this poor wretch's soul is to stake, for the work of the demon does for the priest. Distaste for the priest deepened in Conan's soul. He had heard this tale just a year sooner. He would have scoffed. Yet now he had met strange beings from other worlds and had seen magics that defied any mortal explanation. "Where is the scroll you prize so much?" Conan asked. "If I tell you, Northman, will you do me a service?" the wretch asked him. Conan winced. He could intuit the coming question, having heard it asked of him before. The pitiful conditions of the human before him reminded him of the conditions he had found the blind Yagkosha in. Both had been tortured. Both had been betrayed. Neither seemed to deserve the sorrows they had received. "Yes," Conan replied grimly. "They keep it in the room next to mine. I hear them enter it when they wish me to translate the scroll. And when I cannot, they beat me, or apply hot irons to my back. Please, Northman, kill me. Do not let me live another night in this spot for their torturer," the man pleaded with him. The urge of every Cimmerian arose in Conan, the urge to fight and survive. He wanted to encourage the man to fight and flee. Conan could easily break the chains or pick the lock of the manacles. Yet, the atrophied legs of the wretch would slow his progress, and the chances of being caught would increase. The cold and practical part of his mind argued with the warrior tradition with which he had been born. Close your eyes, old man. Think of better days, in the arms of the woman who have loved you, Conan said. The old man smiled and did as he was bid. It disgusted Conan to perform as the man's executioner. He told himself that it was little different from helping a mortally wounded soldier receive a mercy stroke. Yet he did not believe it, and on his internal account of deeds that needed redress, he added this one to the tally of Derle Moch. He gently laid the man down and wiped his dagger, which he had used to do the deed, on the rags the prisoner wore. He opened the door and regarded the guard. The temptation to eliminate the man who served Moch was very strong, but it would not lessen Conan's anger at the priest, nor even the scales of justice. The lazy guard was simply a subject of Moch's will, and could just as easily be a guest in one of these prison cells if Moch's ire was raised. Conan crept past the guard and focused now on the scroll room. Its floor had only a simple lock that Parkar could have picked in his sleep. It was much more difficult for Conan, who broke a pick attempting to jimmy the lock open. His normal approach to thievery was the strong-arm attempt, the cutting of the purse, or if needs be, a break-in through a window or old door. Yet now, none of these tactics would avail him here. An echo of the little thief's voice whispered in his mind again, "Patience, patience, patience!" Finally he was rewarded with a clicking sound, and the door was open. Conan whispered, "Thank you, Parkar," briefly in memory of his friend. Then he proceeded to the task. Conan entered the room and carefully observed it. A candle was almost burned down to its last bit of wick. The scroll was not surrounded by any sigils or occult signs. It was a large scroll, however. The scroll was easily a yard long and a foot and a half thick. Its two poles were tied together with leather cords about the top and bottom handholds, and a cloth was wrapped around it and cinched with more leather thongs to keep the vellum under the cloth rolled against the staves of the scroll. Conan had not expected it to be so large. He would have a difficult time if he had to fight while carrying it. The room was also filled with boxes. In one box there were spices and silk from Kichai. Finely wrought silver objects to art lined the shelves of the room. Paintings depicting scenes both fanciful and horrifying hung, seeking the admiration of whoever entered the room. Conan dared not look at them for too long. Using the dying candle for illumination, he checked each of the boxes. Time passed by with resolve cracking inevitably. Conan had to repeat the third lesson of thievery to himself. Halfway through the search, he was rewarded. A large wooden-backed ledger contained coded transactions of all of Moch's personal business. Conan could not break the cipher, but he doubted highly that the temple could have really gone through 100,000 zama upon less as it claimed. Tea was simply not that expensive. Unable to determine what to copy or take from the ledger, he instead decided just to take it all. The scroll was heavier than Conan thought it would be. The staves of the scroll he had assumed would be made of wood, but instead they were of steel. Then Conan tucked the scroll under his arm and crept past the guard and back into the hallways that had no light. Before him the hallway was filled with an acrid black smoke, and from its depths a woman strode to stand a yard in front of him. Her right hand was resting on her hip, and her left hand was directed at the Cimmerian in a gesture that commanded him to stop. The woman looked at Conan with an amused expression. Her long hair was all that she wore, except for a golden collar. Her smile revealed that she had pointed incisors, and her eyes were not human. The green eyes of the woman had vertical, snake-like slits for pupils. "Let me pass," Conan replied. "You cannot harm me, man. I am not mortal," she said. Her fingers dug gouges into the stone of the wall. "You are what Moch had conjured," Conan whispered. "Yes and no. He did not summon my mother as that wretch did. But Derle Moch has imprisoned me. He has a very cunning mind, the spider priest," she hissed. "Further, He has given me orders to let none leave this chamber alive save him and his favorite servant, lest men might learn his secrets." "You look upon your doom, mortal." The thought of running the woman through with his sword to test her boast occurred to Conan. Yet if she truly was some otherworldly beast, he doubted that his steel blade would avail him. Sorcerers were always bartering with devils and making pacts with them. Pacts. Pacts have terms that cannot be broken by the parties that agreed to them. Terms that are precisely worded, Conan thought. "Tell me your name," Conan said. "Yarutpol," the demon woman replied. She clearly saw no harm in telling him her name. "Yarutpol, do you enjoy being the slave of the wizard?" asked Conan. She growled. "Surely a demon as mighty as you could but pry off the golden collar," Conan cried. She silently fumed. "Then, great Yarutpol, listen to my words. If you do not love the sorcerer's treatment of you, and resent his command of you, would you not be inclined to disobey him?" Conan asked. "I must obey the terms of my enslavement," the devil woman spat. "Did the sorcerer ever mention how promptly you should obey this order to slay any who entered here?" The demon paused. She blinked and looked to one side, remembering the invocation that had bound her to Dur-le-Monk. A disturbingly feminine giggle rose from her throat. She looked back at the barbarian and stepped out of his way. The hallway no longer barred, he moved to flee through it. The demon woman caught his arm, though, and forced him against the wall. She looked into the barbarian's eyes, and Conan thought he perceived curiosity and admiration there. Yarutpol smirked. "Continue being daring, thief. Fortune favors those who are bold," Yarutpol said. She stroked the barbarian's clean-shaven chin with air of longing and whimsy. Then she took one step backward, and before Conan's eyes her flesh returned to that acrid smoke from which she was born, and she disappeared. "Crom curse all sorcerers," Conan growled. And then he tried to hide the dread that he felt.